Hey everybody, we are looking at this problem insert interval. You are given an array of non-overlapping intervals where intervals I equals to start I and end I. Represent the start and the end of the ith interval. Something like this. Intervals is sorted in ascending order of the start value, which means over here you can see 1 and 6. You can see 1, 3, 6, 8, and 12. These are in ascending order of start value. We are also given another interval called new interval, and we need to insert this new interval into the existing intervals array. We are also supposed to make sure that the final output is also sorted in the ascending order. Once we are done, we need to return the intervals. Let's take this example. 1, 3 are the start and end interval of the first interval, and 6, 9 are the start and end interval of the next interval. We have a new interval of 2 and 5. If we look at it in our timeline, we have something like from 1 to 3, we have one interval. From 6 to 9, we have another interval. And 2 to 5, which would be something from 2 to 5 over here to over here, we have an interval like this. So over here we have an overlap. So once we have an overlap, we can combine these intervals. So this becomes from 1 to 5. And the next does not have any overlap. So we can say from 6 to 9. And that is the output over here. If you take a look at this example, 4 to 8. 4 belongs somewhere over here between the two of these. 8 belongs at this location. So from here to here, you can combine all of these intervals, and this is what we have done from 3 to 10. And 12 and 16 do not have any overlap, 1 and 2 do not have any overlap. So that's how it's being solved. To solve this problem, let's make some observations. I have this interval, let's call it old interval. I have this new interval, let's call it new interval. This is how they can overlap. There is another overlap possible. What if I have some old interval over here and the new interval like this? This can be another overlap. Or I may not have overlap at all. This is the old interval and this is the new interval. Or I can have a reverse of this. I can have a new interval over here and I can have an old interval over here. They are not overlapping. These are the only four ways in which an old interval and a new interval can interact. So what if I have a overlapping condition? How do I merge them together? Can I say that in both the cases, let's take the minimum x value and let's take the maximum y value. Over here, the merge interval starts from here, which is the minimum x, and it goes till here, which is the maximum of y. Similarly, this is the minimum x and this is the maximum of the y of both. In this situation, I don't really need to worry about uh, the new interval overlapping with the old interval. I can basically say that this old interval goes into my solution as it is, just like over here 1 and 2 was untouched. So this, in this case, I'm pretty sorted. Just put the old interval in the results and not worry about it. In this particular case, since they are not overlapping, can I say let's just insert this new interval into my solution because it's not overlapping with the old interval, and also put this old interval in the solution without any overlapping. Just insert the new, insert the old. The overlapping is completed. Now, what if we have multiple overlappings? I have something like this interval, this interval, this interval, this interval. And the new interval goes something like this. The first time I overlap this. So I can say, okay, the when I overlap, there is a possibility that the new interval, the I am taking the minimum of x and the maximum of y. Whatever the new interval is formed, there is a possibility it also overlaps with the next interval. So after the overlap, it becomes something like this. This, let's say this interval is gone. This is the new interval. And here I have the old intervals, something like this. So over here, I can apply the same algorithm and say this is a case I have seen in which this was the old and this was the new. So I overlap these two. When I overlap these two, it becomes something like this. And these are the old intervals. This is new, and these are the old intervals. They are not overlapping, so I just put them in the result. So I know what to deal with now. I have to deal with overlapping case. I have to deal with a case in which I have to deal with a case where the new interval is before the old interval. So I can just append both these intervals in my final result. Or I can have the new intervals after the old interval. So I just insert the old interval and I don't insert the new interval, and I keep moving through the intervals to see if the new interval overlaps with any other interval. So now this would be the basic of this algorithm. Let's try to look at the code implementation and understand it better. So I'm here in the code editor. The first variable I need is result to store the results. Next up, I would like to iterate through the intervals array. So for I in range length of intervals, after that, I want to check for the first condition, which would be what if the old interval is before the new interval, which means I don't have to worry about the old interval at all. So if intervals I, which will give me the first interval, and 1, which means the y value, if the y value is less than the new intervals x value, let's try to take a look at that. We have a scenario in which the old interval is like this and the new interval is like this. How do we find out this scenario? If the y is less than the x, and this is what we are doing, the y is less than the x, then the old interval is before the new interval, and we do not have to worry about the old interval at all. We can append this in the result. So let's do it. Let's say result dot append intervals of I. The next case would be the new interval before the old interval. So else if intervals I 0, which means the x coordinate greater than the new interval 1. Let's take a look at this example too. I have something like new intervals I0, which is my old one. So I have something like this as the old, and I have something like this as the new, which means I need to compare these points. If the y over here is larger than the x over here, which means take a look at this. This is the y of the old. Sorry, this is the x of the old, and this is the y of the new. So x should be larger than y. Sorry, this is opposite. The y should be less than x. And that is what we are doing. In that case, we can insert the new interval and we can say, you know what, we don't have to worry about anything else. We can just append everything. So result dot append new interval. I can append this new interval and I can do result dot extend. I can add other elements too. So this is how I would like to do it. I and colon. This would append all the next intervals as it is. And we can return the result from over here. We are done. Otherwise, what if this does not happen? In that case, we have a overlapping scenario. Else, this is an overlapping scenario. What was the overlap? How do we overlap? We take the minimum of the x and we take maximum of the y, and the new interval would be modified. The actual new interval would be merged with the old interval we have, and this would form the new interval. So let's say new interval 0 is equals to minimum of new interval 0, which is the x value, and the interval I at 0, and the new interval 1 would be the maximum of new interval 1 and interval I and 1. So this would modify the new interval and we would see if this combines with any other next interval. If in the next loop, if we have this scenario, we change the value of new interval. In the next loop, if there is any overlap, this would be taken care by the else condition. If there is no overlap, we would hit this and we are done. This would return from over here, result. Now we are just missing one more case. What if I have all these intervals like this and the new interval is somewhere over here? In that case, I would iterate through all of this, but I would never hit a condition where the new interval is before an old interval. I would never hit this case. In that case, this new interval would never be appended in the result. So to take care of that scenario, once we are done looping through intervals, we can say result dot append new interval. This will take care of a scenario where we do not hit this condition. And with this, we are done with the code. Let's return the value of result in the end. Let's run this code. So we have a typo here. It's intervals. Let's run this again. It's passing. Let's submit it. So over here, we have a solution.